Commander Vextara walked into the large classroom with heavy steps that echoed off the metal walls. Her 4 purple eyes moved slowly across the room, looking at each student sitting at their desks. The classroom was filled with many different types of aliens from across the galaxy. There were tall, thin creatures made of living crystal that sparkled under the bright lights. Their bodies looked like walking diamonds, and when they moved, they made soft ringing sounds like wind chimes. In another corner sat the bug-like aliens called Chiri, with their huge compound eyes that could see everything at once. Their 6 arms moved constantly, always busy with something. Near the windows, there were floating clouds of gas inside special suits. These were the Nebulans, who had no solid bodies at all. They spoke through electronic voices that sounded like whispers. Other strange creatures filled the rest of the seats. Some had tentacles instead of arms, others had scales that changed colors, and a few looked like walking plants with leaves for hair. But in the very back row, sitting alone at a simple metal desk, was James Miller. He was the only human in the entire academy. His brown hair was messy, and his blue eyes looked tired from staying up late studying alien technology. He wore the same gray uniform as everyone else, but somehow it looked different on him. While the other students used floating desks and chairs made from advanced materials, James sat on a basic metal chair that creaked when he moved. The other students often stared at James during classes. Humans were still new to the galaxy, and most aliens had never seen one before. They whispered about how strange humans looked with only 2 eyes and no special abilities. James could not see through walls like the crystal aliens, or calculate 1,000 math problems at once like the Chiri, or float through the air like the Nebulans. He was just a regular person trying to keep up with the smartest beings in the galaxy. Commander Vextara reached the front of the classroom and turned around. Her 4 eyes blinked one at a time, which always made James feel dizzy to watch. She was a member of an ancient race called the Kethma, and she had been teaching at the academy for over 200 years. Her skin was dark green with silver spots, and her voice sounded like rocks grinding together when she spoke without her translator. "Students, attention please," she said. The electronic translator box on her chest turned her words into perfect galactic standard language. "Today we will have a special test. This is not about memorizing facts or solving equations. This is about thinking like a real soldier." The crystal aliens stopped their quiet ringing sounds. The Chiri folded all 6 of their arms and focused their compound eyes forward. Even the floating gas cloud seemed to pay closer attention. James sat up straighter in his creaking chair and pulled out a simple notebook and pen. While everyone else used holographic computers that appeared in the air, James still wrote things down by hand. "Your assignment is simple but important," Commander Vextara continued, walking back and forth in front of the class. "You have exactly 2 hours to design and build a weapon for close combat. You may only use materials that you can find in this classroom. Nothing from outside, nothing from your personal belongings, nothing from the supply closets." She stopped walking and let her 4 eyes scan across every student. "You will be judged on 3 things. First, how creative your weapon is. Second, how well it works in combat. Third, how smartly you use the materials you find. The student with the best weapon will receive extra credit that could help them graduate early." Immediately, the classroom exploded into activity. The crystal aliens began pulling out devices that looked like tiny telescopes. These were molecular scanners that could tell them exactly what every object in the room was made of, down to the smallest particle. They pointed their scanners at the walls, the floors, the ceiling, and even the air itself. Numbers and symbols appeared in floating displays above their desks as they calculated which materials would make the strongest weapons. The Chiri students were just as busy but in a different way. Their 6 arms moved like lightning as they pulled out different tools from their backpacks. Some arms held cameras that took pictures of everything in the room. Other arms held computers that immediately began running complex programs. Their compound eyes looked in dozens of directions at once, gathering information faster than any other species could think. The Nebulan gas clouds started floating around the room inside their special suits. They moved like ghosts, checking every corner and examining things that the other students missed. Their electronic voices whispered to each other as they shared information about air particles and dust that could be used to build weapons. All around the classroom, alien students pulled out incredible technology that James had never seen before. Some had machines that could see inside solid objects. Others had computers that could predict how strong a material would be just by looking at it. A few students even had devices that could change the basic structure of matter itself. James looked around at all this amazing activity and felt very small. He had no special scanners, no floating computers, no devices that could see through walls. All he had was his notebook, his pen, and his human brain. While the other students spent their time gathering data and running calculations, James simply looked around the room with his two ordinary eyes. He saw desks made of metal and plastic. He saw chairs with 4 legs each. He saw windows with metal frames. He saw lights hanging from the ceiling with metal supports. Everything looked normal to him, but he knew the other students were finding things he could not even imagine. James picked up his pen and started making a simple list of what he could see. Metal, plastic, glass, and fabric from the uniforms. Nothing special, nothing high-tech, nothing that seemed useful for making a weapon. But as he wrote, a small smile began to appear on his face. Maybe being ordinary was not such a bad thing after all. While the alien students continued their complicated work with fancy machines and computers, James sat quietly in his chair for several minutes. He watched them point their scanners at everything, take measurements, and fill the air with floating numbers and charts. The crystal aliens had found tiny amounts of rare metals in the walls and were trying to figure out how to extract them. The Chiri were using their 6 arms to build small machines that could reshape materials at the molecular level. The gas cloud nebulans floated around collecting dust particles and analyzing their chemical makeup. James looked down at his simple notebook. He had written only a few words: metal, plastic, glass, fabric. Compared to the pages of complex equations and scientific formulas that covered the other students' holographic displays, his list looked like something a child might write. But James was not worried. He closed his notebook and stood up from his desk. The chair he had been sitting on was just like all the others in the classroom. It was made of plain gray metal with 4 legs and a flat seat. The academy had bought thousands of these chairs because they were cheap and strong. Nothing fancy, nothing special, just basic furniture that could hold students from many different alien species. James looked at his chair for a moment, then reached down and grabbed one of the metal legs with both hands. The Chiri student sitting nearest to James noticed what he was doing. All 6 of her compound eyes turned toward him, and she made a clicking sound that meant confusion in her language. "What is the human doing?" she whispered to her partner. "His behavior appears most unusual." James ignored the stares and whispers. He twisted the chair leg back and forth, testing how it was connected to the seat. The leg was held in place by a simple joint that was designed to be strong but not permanent. After a few twists, James felt the metal beginning to bend. He twisted harder, putting his full weight behind it. The other students stopped their work to watch this strange human who seemed to be breaking furniture. With a loud crack that echoed through the quiet classroom, the chair leg came free. James stumbled backward a step but kept his balance. He held up the metal rod, which was about as long as his arm and as thick as his thumb. One end was flat where it had been attached to the chair. The other end had broken off in a rough, jagged way. Several alien students made sounds that their translators could not convert into words. Some sounded like laughter, others like confusion. The crystal aliens stopped their molecular scanning to stare at James. Even Commander Vextara looked up from her desk at the front of the room, her 4 eyes blinking in surprise. "Is the human's mental state stable?" asked one of the nebulan gas clouds in its whispering electronic voice. "This behavior seems to serve no logical purpose." James did not answer. He walked over to the rough concrete floor near the back wall of the classroom. The floor there was old and had a surface like sandpaper, with tiny bits of rock and metal mixed into the concrete. James knelt down and began rubbing the broken end of the chair leg against this rough surface. The scraping sound was loud and harsh. It made the sensitive hearing organs of several alien species hurt, and they covered their ears with their various appendages. But James kept working, moving the metal back and forth against the concrete in steady, even strokes. With each scrape, tiny bits of metal came off, and the broken ends slowly began to take on a new shape. "I do not understand this primitive technique," said one of the crystal aliens to his partner. "Why does he not use a molecular restructuring device? Why does he not apply mathematical formulas to calculate the optimal point angle? His method is inefficient and crude." The Chiri student who had first noticed James was now completely focused on him. Her compound eyes tracked every movement he made, trying to understand what he was trying to accomplish. She had never seen anyone make anything without using technology. In her culture, even the simplest tasks required computers and machines. The idea of shaping metal by scraping it against stone seemed impossible to her logical mind. James worked for nearly 30 minutes, ignoring the stares and comments from his classmates. His hands began to hurt from gripping the metal rod, and his knees were sore from kneeling on the hard floor. But he did not stop. Slowly, very slowly, the broken end of the chair leg was becoming sharp and pointed. It was not perfect, and it certainly was not as precise as anything the other students were making with their advanced tools. but it was getting sharper with every scrape. The other students had mostly gone back to their own projects, though they still glanced at James from time to time. The crystal aliens had successfully extracted enough rare metals to begin growing small crystalline blades. The Chiri had built tiny machines that were reshaping plastic and metal into complex weapon designs. The Nebulans had collected enough particles to begin forming some kind of energy-based weapon. All around the classroom, incredible weapons were taking shape. There were swords that glowed with inner light, whips that moved like living snakes, and staffs that crackled with electricity. Each weapon was a masterpiece of science and engineering, designed by some of the smartest beings in the galaxy. James stood up and brushed the concrete dust off his knees. He held up his work and examined it carefully. The chair leg now had a sharp point on one end and a comfortable grip on the other. It was about 3 feet long and well balanced. He gave it a few practice swings through the air, testing its weight and feel. "There," he said quietly to himself, loud enough that a few nearby students could hear him. "Spear." When the 2 hours were finished, Commander Vextara stood up from her desk and clapped her hands together once. The sound was sharp and loud, and all the students immediately stopped working. Around the classroom, amazing weapons sat on desks like pieces of art in a museum. The crystal aliens had grown beautiful swords that looked like they were made of diamonds. When light hit them, they threw rainbow colors across the walls. The weapons were so clear and perfect that they seemed to glow from inside. The Chiri students had built weapons that looked like they came from the future. Their tools had multiple parts that moved and changed shape. Some looked like metal flowers that could open and close. Others looked like small robots that could crawl along the ground. Each weapon was covered in tiny lights and made soft humming sounds that showed they were full of advanced technology. The Nebulan gas clouds had created weapons that were hard to even see. They looked like clear glass rods that seemed to bend light around them. Sometimes they flickered and sparkled like heat waves rising from hot pavement. When the Nebulans held these weapons, electricity jumped between their gas-filled suits and the strange devices. Other alien species had made their own incredible creations. There were weapons that changed colors, weapons that sang in musical tones, and weapons that floated in the air by themselves. The room was filled with the most advanced technology that James had ever seen. Compared to all these amazing inventions, his simple sharpened chair leg looked like something a caveman might have made. Commander Vextara began walking around the classroom, stopping at each desk to examine the weapons. She carried a small device that could scan and measure anything she pointed it at. Her 4 eyes moved independently, looking at different parts of each weapon at the same time. She asked each student to explain how their weapon worked and what made it special. At the first desk, a crystal alien held up his diamond sword. "This weapon is grown from rare metals extracted from the classroom walls," he said in a voice that sounded like wind chimes. "The molecular structure is perfectly aligned for maximum cutting power. It can slice through any known material in the galaxy and will never become dull or break." Commander Vextara nodded and made notes on her scanner. She moved to the next desk where a Chiri student demonstrated her shape-changing weapon. "This device can transform into 12 different weapon types," the student explained, her 6 arms moving rapidly to show each form. "It has built-in targeting computers, self-repair systems, and can adapt to any combat situation automatically." The teacher continued around the room, and each weapon was more impressive than the last. Students explained complex scientific principles, showed off incredible features, and demonstrated abilities that seemed almost like magic to James. Some weapons could shoot energy beams, others could create force fields, and a few could even bend the laws of physics in small ways. Finally, Commander Vextara reached the back of the classroom where James sat with his sharpened chair leg lying across his desk. Her 4 purple eyes focused on the simple weapon, and James could tell she was trying to understand what she was looking at. After examining the crystal swords and energy weapons, his pointed stick must have looked very strange to her. "Cadet Miller," she said, her translator turning her rocky voice into standard galactic language. "Please explain your weapon to the class." James stood up and picked up his makeshift spear. The metal felt warm in his hands from all the work he had done shaping it. He looked around the classroom at all the other students, who had stopped talking to listen to him. Their various eyes, sensors, and other seeing organs were all focused on him and his simple weapon. "Well," James said, holding up the chair leg so everyone could see it clearly, "it's a pointed stick. You hold this end here, and you stick the sharp end into whatever you're fighting. It's been working pretty well for my people for about 50,000 years, maybe more." The classroom was completely silent for a moment. Then several alien students began making sounds that their translators had trouble converting. Some sounded like mechanical laughter, others like confused chirping. A few students made no sound at all but simply stared at James as if he had said something impossible. One of the crystal aliens raised his hand and spoke in his chiming voice. Cadet Miller, my analysis shows that your weapon is simply a piece of furniture with one end modified to a point. It has no advanced materials, no energy systems, no computer guidance, no molecular enhancement, and no special properties of any kind. James nodded and smiled. That's right. It's just a sharp stick. But how can such a primitive design be effective against modern threats? Asked a cheery student, her compound eyes reflecting light like jewels. It has no defensive capabilities, no range beyond arm's length, and no technological advantages whatsoever. True, James agreed cheerfully. But it works. Commander Vextara looked at her scanner, which was having trouble analyzing James's weapon because there was so little technology in it to measure. We will now proceed to the combat effectiveness test, she announced. Each student will demonstrate their weapon against holographic targets that will measure damage and assess practical battlefield performance. Large blue holographic enemies appeared in the center of the classroom. They looked like generic soldier shapes, glowing and semi-transparent. The computer would record how much damage each weapon could do and how quickly it could defeat the targets. The crystal aliens went first, and their diamond swords cut through the holographic enemies like they were made of paper. The cheery weapons adapted and changed, finding the perfect form to defeat each target. The Nebulan energy weapons made the holograms disappear in flashes of light. When it was James's turn, he walked up to his holographic target and drove the sharpened chair leg straight through its center with one quick thrust. Target neutralized, announced the computer in its calm electronic voice. Fatal penetrating wound delivered. Time to defeat target, 0.3 seconds. Weapon reliability, maximum rating. Resource efficiency, maximum rating. Commander Vextara walked back to the front of the classroom as the holographic targets disappeared. Her scanner beeped and chirped as it finished analyzing all the test results. The large display screen on the wall flickered to life, showing charts and numbers that measured how well each weapon had performed. The alien students leaned forward in their seats, eager to see which of their amazing creations had scored the highest. At the top of the screen, 3 categories appeared in bright letters: innovation and technology, combat effectiveness, and resource efficiency. Under the first category, the crystal swords and energy weapons had perfect scores. Their advanced technology and complex engineering impressed the computer systems. The shape-changing cheery weapons and the Nebulan energy devices also scored very high for their scientific brilliance. But when the second and third categories appeared, something unexpected happened. At the very top of both lists was a simple entry that read human weapon, modified chair leg. The numbers next to it showed maximum scores in combat effectiveness and resource efficiency. Several alien students made confused sounds when they saw this, their translators struggling to convert expressions of disbelief. James looked at the screen and felt surprised himself. He had not expected his simple spear to rank higher than the incredible weapons his classmates had built. The crystal alien sitting in front of him turned around, his diamond-like face reflecting the light from the display screen. There must be an error in the computer system, the crystal alien said in his wind chime voice. How can a primitive weapon outperform our advanced engineering? This result makes no logical sense. A cheery student stood up, all 6 of her arms gesturing at the screen. I demand a recount of the scores. My weapon has targeting computers, self-repair systems, and molecular restructuring abilities. It is clearly superior to a sharpened piece of furniture. Even the floating Nebulan gas cloud seemed agitated, their electronic voices whispering rapidly to each other in languages the translators could barely understand. All around the classroom, alien students who had spent hours creating technological marvels could not believe that a human with a pointed stick had somehow beaten them. Commander Vextara raised one of her 4 hands for silence. The computer scores are correct, she announced. The human weapon achieved maximum ratings in practical effectiveness and efficient use of materials. While other weapons scored higher in technological complexity, they did not perform better in actual combat situations. A tall, thin alien with silver skin and large black eyes stood up from his desk. But Commander, how is this possible? The human's weapon has no special powers, no advanced features, no scientific principles that make it superior to our creations. James had been listening quietly, but now he felt like he should explain. He stood up and picked up his sharpened chair leg, holding it so everyone in the classroom could see it clearly. You want to know why this works better? He asked, looking around at all the confused alien faces staring at him. Yes, said the cheery student with 6 arms. Please explain how your primitive tool can be superior to our advanced technology. James smiled and walked to the center of the classroom where everyone could see him clearly. Because you're all thinking like scientists and engineers, but you're not thinking like fighters. Your weapons are incredible, and they do amazing things. But let me ask you something important. He pointed to the beautiful crystal sword on the nearest desk. What happens when your diamond blade hits something harder than it is and gets a crack in it? What do you do then? The crystal alien who had made the sword looked uncertain. Well, I suppose I would need to return to a laboratory with the proper equipment to repair the molecular structure. Right, James said, nodding. And what about you? He pointed to the cheery student with the shape-changing weapon. What happens when the power source for your targeting computer runs out? Or when the self-repair system breaks down? The cheery student's compound eyes blinked rapidly. I would need to return to a technical facility with replacement parts and charging stations. James held up his simple spear. But what if you're in the middle of a battle, far from any laboratory or repair facility? What if you're on a planet with no advanced technology, or your ship crashes and you lose all your equipment? What good are your amazing weapons then? The classroom was very quiet now. The alien students were beginning to understand something they had never thought about before. Their weapons were wonderful in perfect conditions, but what about when conditions were not perfect? This thing, James said, tapping his chair leg spear on the floor, works anywhere, anytime, in any situation. It doesn't need power, it doesn't need repairs, it doesn't need special materials. If it breaks, I can make another one from almost anything. If I lose it, I can find a stick and have a new weapon in 5 minutes. A young Nebulan floated closer, her electronic voice very quiet. But surely there must be situations where our advanced weapons would be more effective than your simple spear. James nodded. Absolutely. Your weapons are better in lots of ways. They are stronger, faster, and can do things mine never could. But here's the thing, they only work when everything goes right. My spear works even when everything goes wrong. Commander Vextara's mandibles clicked together, which James had learned was a sign that she was thinking hard about something important. The human raises an interesting point, she said slowly. In real combat situations, equipment fails, power runs out, and technology breaks down. The most advanced weapon is useless if it cannot function when you need it most. She walked over to James and examined his simple spear more closely. This weapon represents something we often forget in our pursuit of technological superiority. Sometimes the most sophisticated solution is not the best solution. Sometimes reliability and simplicity are more valuable than complexity and power. The alien students looked at each other with new understanding in their various eyes and sensory organs. They had spent so much time trying to build the most advanced weapons possible that they had forgotten to ask whether their weapons would actually work when they needed them most. The news about what happened in Commander Vextara's classroom spread through the academy faster than anyone expected. Within just a few days, every student and teacher in the entire space station had heard the story about the human who beat advanced alien technology with a sharpened chair leg. Some people called it the chair leg incident, while others simply referred to it as the day the human won with a stick. At first, many alien students and teachers did not believe the story. They thought it was just a joke or a mistake in the computer systems. How could a primitive weapon made by a human defeat the most advanced technology in the galaxy? But when they checked the official test results and watched the recorded video of James defeating the holographic target, they had to accept that it really happened. Other instructors throughout the academy began to hear about Commander Vextara's unusual test results. Professor Clixandra, who taught advanced engineering, decided to try a similar experiment with her own students. Instead of asking them to build the most complex machine possible, she gave them a simple problem and told them to solve it using only basic materials they could find in the classroom. The results surprised everyone. When alien students were forced to work without their advanced technology, they struggled to solve even simple problems. They had become so dependent on their computers and machines that they had forgotten how to think creatively with basic materials. Many of them could not complete the assignment at all. But the few human exchange students in other classes approached these new challenges differently. They looked around the room, picked up ordinary objects, and found ways to make them work together to solve the problems. Their solutions were not as elegant or sophisticated as alien technology, but they worked reliably and could be made quickly with materials that were easy to find. Word of these experiments reached the Academy's leadership, and soon professors in many different subjects were incorporating what they called human-style problem-solving into their curriculum. Combat instructors began teaching students how to fight with improvised weapons alongside their high-tech gear. Engineering classes started including lessons on building simple, reliable machines that could work without computer assistance. James found himself in an unusual position. Alien students who had previously ignored him or looked down on him as primitive now approached him with questions and curiosity. They wanted to understand how humans could be so good at finding practical solutions to difficult problems. One afternoon in the Academy's recreation center, James was sitting at a table reading when a group of alien students approached him. There was a crystal alien named Thixkara, a cheery student called Vectana, and a Nebulan who went by the name Cloudwalker. They had been working together on a group project and were having trouble with an assignment. "James," said Thixkara in his musical voice, "we have been attempting to solve an engineering problem for our advanced systems class. Our computer models show 17 different possible solutions, but our professor says none of them will work in real-world conditions. We do not understand what we are doing wrong." James looked up from his book and smiled. "What's the problem you're trying to solve?" Vectana spread several holographic displays in the air above the table. Complex diagrams and equations filled the space between them, showing detailed technical specifications for some kind of device. "We must design a communication system that can work on planets with no existing technology infrastructure. The system must be reliable, easy to repair, and simple enough for non-technical people to operate." James studied the floating displays for a few minutes. The alien students had designed an incredibly complex system with quantum processors, molecular transmitters, and self-repairing nanomachines. It was a masterpiece of engineering that could probably communicate across entire star systems. It was also completely impractical for the stated purpose. "Your design is amazing," James said honestly. "But I think you're overcomplicating things. If you need to communicate on a planet with no technology, why not use something that doesn't need technology at all?" Cloudwalker's electronic voice sounded confused. "How can one communicate without technology? This seems contradictory to basic principles of information transmission." James stood up and walked over to the recreation center's supply closet. He came back with a small mirror and held it up so it caught the light from the ceiling. By angling the mirror, he could make a bright spot of reflected light appear on the far wall. He moved his hand to make the light flash on and off in a simple pattern. "Light signals," he explained. "You can see them for miles during the day, and they work even better at night with a fire or electric light. No power source needed except the sun, no complex equipment to break down, no quantum processes to malfunction. Anyone can learn the basic patterns in a few hours." The alien students stared at the simple light pattern James was making on the wall. After working for weeks on quantum communication arrays and molecular transmitters, the solution seemed almost too simple to be real. "But this method has severe limitations," Thixkara pointed out. "The range is restricted to line of sight, the data transmission rate is extremely low, and it cannot function in bad weather conditions." "True," James agreed. "But it works when nothing else does. And you can combine it with other simple methods. Smoke signals during the day, drum beats that carry sound over long distances, even trained animals that can carry messages. None of these methods are perfect, but together they create a communication network that's almost impossible to completely shut down." The alien students looked at each other with new understanding. They had been trying to solve the problem by building something more advanced than existing technology. But James was suggesting they solve it by building something simpler and more reliable than existing technology. Over the following weeks, more and more students came to James with similar questions. They were beginning to understand that human thinking offered a different perspective on problem-solving that their advanced civilizations had somehow missed. Humans did not always build the best tools, but they were very good at building tools that worked when everything else failed. Commander Vextara decided to include James's simple spear in the Academy's permanent museum collection. She placed it in a special display case with a sign that read, "Human ingenuity. Sometimes the most advanced technology is knowing when not to use advanced technology."